Good morning. Thanks everybody for being here. We'll be back in 1 Corinthians 13 and 14 for this morning's Bible study period. Thanks everybody for making the effort to be here this morning. Before we dive in, go ask Brother Hank to start us with a word of prayer.
With me, please. Heavenly Father, we come before you. Thank you for another day together. Father, as we dive into your word, pray that Michael has the study, be with all the other teachers, everything.
Amen. Thank you. So we went through quite a bit of material pretty quickly on Wednesday, and so I want to cover again just a couple of things from lesson 13. We tackled a lot of the questions I think from lesson 13. I'm on page 26 of the material. If you got the material with you this morning, but there's probably a couple of topics there that we didn't fully discuss and it's worth some more conversation. But before I do that, is there any questions or comments? Anything been on anybody's mind since Wednesday? Just need to be hashed out among the group here? Dangerous question based on where we've been. Yes, ma'am.
I had a comment that God gives us what we need at the time that we need it.
Yes.
Everything's perfect. So do you think the references to the angels doing this, so the angels would be happy, is maybe we don't need the angels amongst us now? Or is there angels amongst us besides Donna Ray?
Angels besides Donna Ray, was what Miss Carol said. She missed it, Carol. You tried your best, but she missed it.
Okay. I was thinking about that for a while.
So we can. I wasn't ready for the angels diversion this morning. I'll be quite honest. So the reference that Miss Carol notes is we're going back to chapter 11 because of the angels. Where is that? Verse 10. And so what is the role of angels? Not one I was prepared for this morning. We know that the book of Hebrews tells us they're ministering spirits given to us to aid in salvation. I'm inclined that God hasn't just set them over to the sidelines and they're inactive. But how are they active is probably beyond what I'm prepared for this morning. Miss Carol, I'll be very honest with you.
Well, I think we've been taught around the Bible, and we should be worshiping with our hearts, not just going through the physical activities.
Yes, ma'am. And
I think maybe, the angels are aware, they're reporting to God, or however this goes.
Yes.
That, this is true worship.
We know that the angels are definitely aware of what's going on.
Yes.
And they're interested.
Yes.
And in whatever way, the book of Hebrews says they're helping. And so we is that encouragement that we see there in chapter 11. It's the only thing that kind of halfway makes sense to me. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
But one and the same Spirit works all these things, distributing
Yes, ma'am.
I know that the Spirit still works. How He does that, I don't know. But I do feel that He's still giving people their gifts, just not the miraculous ability.
Yes.
Do you feel that way? I don't know that He indwells in us.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes.
How it comes about, but I still feel, that's His job, the Spirit's job. So if He's not doing His job, then what is He doing?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
but I don't know how He does that. I used to think it was through the Bible, but we have the Bible, so that would mean His job is done. But
Yes.
it's not. I do feel that
Yes.
some work individually, but how he does it still, I don't know, but I feel he still is at work.
Yes.
In us. How do you feel?
So, this is, again, good question. So one of the things we talked about on Wednesday was Romans chapter 12, and that list of gifts. There are gifts that I think we all agree remain, and which leads to which I think is a question I don't think I have the answer to, but it's an interesting question. Is if there are these gifts that remain, where do they come from, and when do we get them? Which I think are both pretty interesting topics, and ones that I'm not sure that I have the answer to. I share that I believe that the Holy Spirit is active and working. I think that we can find plenty of evidence in that, and we can certainly pick out scriptures that give pieces of what his job is. You know, from Romans chapter 8, he's involved in our prayers. From 1 Corinthians chapter 2, he's active in things we're doing. I'll mangle that verse if I try to quote it. But I do believe the Spirit is active. Now, what role does he have in these? Again, I'm going to use the word common, even though I don't think that's a great term. In these common gifts, in these gifts that remain. Anybody have any comments or thoughts about that?
I think in miraculous, performing
Yes. Again, whatever work the Spirit is doing today, I agree that Christians are used for that, and we know that, again, to the point you made earlier, Ms. Carroll, that God puts gifts in the church as He has assigned them, that there would be no lack and that the church would be complete. So, where do they come from? When do we get them? Thoughts or comments about that?
Acts 38, we kind of say we get them by the gospel.
Yep.
Then you shall receive, get it.
Yep.
You're going to get it.
Yep.
Agree. And I'm talking about salvation there and forgiveness. I think as we grow and mature in Christ, that we desire those. We desire it. It says to desire those in the chapter we're talking about.
Yes.
And I don't think it's gone away as the ones that we can grow. Christian graces we can grow in.
Yes. Paul says something interesting to Timothy, and I was trying to look. I've got the reference somewhere, and I'm having a hard time finding it. But Paul tells Timothy, and I will note here that he's talking about a gift that's given on by the laying on of hands. So he's talking about a little different measure of the Spirit. But he tells Timothy to fan the flame of the Spirit, I would take that to mean to continue to work to grow these gifts that you have been given. I think that's important to note here also, is that whatever gift that we have is not zap, and we don't have any control over it or anything to do with it. That when Paul tells Timothy to fan the flame of the Spirit, he's saying you've got some work involved here if you're going to maintain and grow these abilities that you have. You're going to have to continue to study. You're going to have to continue to pray. You're going to have to continue to meet with God's people. You're going to have to continue to meditate on these things in order to fan the flame of the gift that you've been given. So I think to Karen's point, the idea that the Spirit is involved in the gifts that are available in the church today doesn't mean that we don't have any responsibility in growing and enhancing those gifts. Because I think, as in many things, it's a partnership. God does amazing things in putting His providence in the right place, but we've got to do our part if we're going to be useful to Him in the kingdom. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I missed that one completely. So yeah, try me again.
So if we're given, I know that when we're baptized, but if we're given gifts then, so let's say men, 10 years after they're
Yes.
Well, how do you know? So are the gifts predestined at that time? Some men are predestined to become elders. What if somebody aspires to be or a deacon or a preacher? Work, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Can they work towards it even though that's? I don't know that I understand about that.
Yeah.
Can you aspire to do that? I don't know.
And it's a little bit on the nature of what the word, I'm going to let the elders tackle this one. It's a little bit of, when we use the word gift, we kind of have this assumption that we're talking about, well, it's just something that's handed to us and, there.
Pray for the gift?
Yeah, is it, when we say that God puts elders in the church, we're saying that some have been gifted with that ability and they're the only ones that have been gifted with it, and if you're not gifted with it, then you don't have the ability. I'm not sure that is precisely the right definition of what God has been put into the church in that manner. Now, do some have, there's a differentiation between the word talent and the word gift. Those are kind of two different things. But do some have certain talents that lead themselves toward different roles? I think that's accurate. But I think there is a distinction between the word talent and gift. But I'm going to let the elders answer that question. Is being an elder a gift? Is it something that is available to anyone, or is it something that is charisma?
All young men should aspire to that.
Yes. If anyone aspires to the office of an elder, he aspires to good work.
Right.
Yes. Your turn. Rita? No.
I didn't know where I was sitting. No, I don't. You're not. I don't. In my mind, you're not predestined to be an elder. Development as a display traits that you find that are qualifications for elders, and others see those traits in you, and church appointing the elder under God's oversight, of course. I don't think you say, I'm going to be an elder, I desire to be an elder, without doing without growing as a Christian throughout your life to those qualifications, as well as the family thing. You can, if you don't have all that in line, then you can desire it all you want. It's not going to happen. It should not happen. It doesn't, but it should not happen. I don't think it's anything that when I was born, God said, make you
Yeah.
follow what I believe.
Or even when you became a Christian, that there was a particular gift that you were given that was not given to others. I think, the Spirit. I always try to think about Ephesians chapter 1:14. This guarantee of our inheritance of the Spirit that we're given. I don't think that it qualifies some to be in roles in the church and not others. I don't think that would be consistent.
And that's what you said.
No. I think that's fair.
Teaching, any. I was just wondering.
Right.
The Spirit.
I do think that whether you, and we could debate whether it's something that's kind of inborn or something that comes from the Spirit of baptism. I think that we could debate about that. But is it true that some people have a aptitude for communicating the word? Yes. Right? That is even in our kind of everyday language, we'd call that a gift. Now, does everybody have that in equal measure? No. But can we do things to either augment it or let it deteriorate? For sure. We can fan the flame of the Spirit, if you want to use that language, or we can quench it. I don't know if I'm helping. But anyway, I'm trying to work through that question myself. Other thoughts or comments about that?
Spirit dwells in our must dwell more in some
Yes.
Same Spirit supposedly dwells in all of us.
Yes.
It's just not working to the extent that motivated.
Yes. Well, we know we can quench the Spirit too. Yeah. So, and I think if I was trying to use a scriptural word for that window is the different measures. You know, we're told that Jesus had the Spirit without measure. So I take that to mean that he had, you know, the highest level. And what measure we are fanning the flame of the Spirit to have is going to be visible in the evidence, which is the fruit, right? Fruit of the Spirit. So that would be the evidence that the Spirit is either the flames are being fanned and the Spirit is growing and I've got more of that evidence, or it's being quenched and I've got less of that evidence. But I think that Galatians 5 probably fits in here also in that regard. Faith, hope, love, peace, long-suffering, all of those fruits of the Spirit be evidence of those things in our lives.
It might appear that one who knows the most Word of God, more dedicated to it, studied it, seems to have more of it.
At least in one regard. I would think from 1 Corinthians 13, if you want to put a pin, start there, the one who loves the most might be a place to start too. Because, even as Paul says, I can know everything there is to know, but if I don't have love, I'm nothing. So where does that love come from? It's a reflection of the love of God, in my judgment, through that Spirit that's in us, to help us understand and grow it. I don't think that we can draw a flow chart to show exactly how this works. I don't think it's that. It's not intended to be like we can see all the mechanisms on the inside of the watch that is working here, but we see the evidence of it in people's lives. People who are dedicated to God's work, you see the peace and joy and long suffering and patience as the outcome of their life. And so you say, is the Spirit working in them? Yeah, look. And anyway, it appears to me that that's the only way that we can really know. I don't think there's another test for it.
One more comment about that.
Yes, sir.
The Pentecostals,
Yes.
Churches of God,
Yeah.
those groups, I still believe the Spirit works on them. They speak in tongues and
Yes, sir.
believe in instantaneously healing, such things.
Yes, sir.
But really and truly, worship, it's expectation. They expect God to bless them that way. Therefore, they think He does.
Yes.
I know where I'm speaking because I used to be a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it really boils down to expectation.
Yeah, that's a good comment. And so, in some ways, you feel for the person who is sincerely in that group and sincerely expects that miraculous manifestation of the Spirit, and gets themselves in such a frame of mind where I'm either going to be disappointed and think that I have no faith because this doesn't happen, or I'm going to work myself into this frenzy where it does happen. I always feel for the person who's in that state, genuinely, sincerely misled about how the Spirit should be acting in their lives. It's a good point. So it is much about that expectation. I appreciate that comment. Whew, we got in deep water early. Any other thoughts or comments about these gifts that we're given? We do know that whatever, and this is 1 Corinthians 12, whatever ministries, whatever service that we can provide, whatever, and I think this is interesting. It's in the first few verses, verse 4, 5, and 6 of chapter 12. Whatever service in verse 5, that's the word diakonia, the same word that deacon comes from. Whatever service we provide, whatever activities, I don't know what your version says in verse 6, whatever energy, that's the root word there, whatever energy we put forth, whatever ministries we provide, whatever efforts that we put forth on behalf of the kingdom, it says in chapter 12, it comes from the same Spirit. I would take that to mean whether it is miraculous, so to speak, as we're talking about the effect of spiritual gifts, or whether it's some of these more common, again, I don't like that word, but I'm using it accommodatively, these more common ministries that we're involved in today. Anyway, as I read that verse, I take that to mean like these things that you guys think are phenomenal and these guys you think are mundane, they all come from the same Spirit. The smallest act of service, verse 5, the smallest act of service, all of the energy put forth in God's kingdom, that's all motivated by the same Spirit. Yes, ma'am. Sorry. Yes, ma'am. Keep them coming.
About that. So let's say the Spirit did give you a talent or something.
Yes.
About this. What if you don't use you remain a faithful Christian, but you fall short on that spiritual gift?
Yes.
Sin.
So is, yeah.
Can you, I mean, be a faithful Christian all your life because that's a gift that you're not using.
I think we should all be concerned about, I think about the verse, when you've done everything there is to do, you can only say, I'm an unprofitable servant, right? There's no earning it. There's no, I've utilized my gift, and so I'm okay. But there also certainly is I know I have abilities, but I'm just going to sit here and do my thing, and let the church go on around me. I'm in no position to be in judgment by any means, but I think we should all be concerned about that. If we know that we have abilities and we're not utilizing for the kingdom, then what are we utilizing for? I even think about that. These abilities aren't like these are only kingdom, like the only place that we see these happening is in worship. We see people who are Christians who are fantastic school teachers. If that is the only outlet of that gift, and it's not being utilized in the kingdom, we should be watching. If we see somebody who's a fabulous minister in some other way of service, provides great service in some manner, and they're not utilizing it in the kingdom, I think that goes to your point, for sure.
Your life, and make an impression on you.
Yes.
You don't know what you're giving what you need. So I think God works
Absolutely.
in other people.
And God certainly works outside the walls of this building, for sure. So not just saying the only place those happen are in the church building, but for the kingdom more broadly, are we utilizing our gifts is certainly part of this study, for sure. Oh, that's a good point.
You don't stop ever adding.
Yes.
You add to whatever you have, adding it.
Yes. Add to your faith virtue and to your virtue knowledge. And yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Whatever God will give you, period. Don't use it. Try to grow into two talents or two spirit persons. Guard.
Yeah, I think that parable of talents is precisely maybe parallel to what we're talking about. Bury it in the ground, not useful for the kingdom, not useful for the master. Exactly. Good thoughts. Anything else? I would like to, on page 26, we talked about 1 Corinthians 13 kind of in general terms. We touched on a few issues, but I want to specifically look at the key word. We've talked a lot, you've probably heard many studies or sermons about the word agape, but probably worth digging into that again and then touch on at least this first question in this lesson. So the word love in 1 Corinthians 13 uniformly, and all the times it's used in this chapter is this word agape. And this God's love, this special kind of love. Unique in a lot of ways from the way that we would use the word love commonly in English. And so, through your study, give me some of the definitions or examples or thoughts about your study of that word agape. What does it mean? How can we make it relevant to us today? Sacrificial. So that's certainly a word to start with. It is. So agape is sacrificial. What else? Always sincere, for sure. Yes. Without expectation of return was one of the notes that I had. I forget which where I found these words, but they stuck with me. Is unconquerable benevolence. It is unstoppable goodwill. Like there is, irrespective of the reaction or the circumstance or my attitude or their attitude or where we are, it is unconquerable goodwill toward another. Unconditional, unconquerable goodwill. Anything else? Any other notes on this word? Yes. Thank you. Elaborate on that, my brother.
That's something that our Lord exemplified.
Yes.
Back to the last comment, reference to John 13, maybe. I think that's one of Paul did on this love. That's the most miraculous gift. We see this in the church, but how many of us actually have that? How many of us in the back of our mind that, well, I'm being taken advantage of? How many of us reserve those thoughts in the back of our mind? That's the part of the heart that's going to be judged.
Yes. Yeah, I would add to that, and I think it's where you're going now. Does agape exist outside of God and the Spirit? I would advocate that it doesn't. Like this is a unique attribute of Spirit-led people. This is like you'll see goodwill in the world, but agape goodwill is just a different level. It's not reciprocal. It's not conditional. It's unique.
Not thinking about yourself at all, you're thinking.
Yes. Yes.
And the world doesn't think that much.
Yes.
And you love everybody?
I'm sorry?
That means that you love everybody?
I think so. I'm happy to have rebuttal there.
You love their soul
Yes.
and not love their behavior,
For sure.
activities such as what's going on in the world.
Sure. No. There's no responsibility that we have to approve and love everything that someone does, right? I think that's a good point. But
Other types of love.
does God love them? If I'm supposed to have God's love, then I'm going to love them too. Now, I don't have to approve what they're doing, and I don't have to love the results of their actions and the consequences, and they may have to suffer consequences of their actions. But I do think that when we get to the point where we don't love somebody, we better step back and reevaluate.
Do you think we achieve the agape? I know we should strive for that, but do we as humans achieve
Ms. Carroll says, do we achieve agape? Anybody around here? Pretty high bar. Yeah, it's a pretty high bar. Yeah.
Because then he gives us the other type of love.
Yes. So does anybody do we think we can agape? Is this unachievable? Yes.
It requires constant choices that
Yes.
So love somebody that's unlovable is not in the sense of like they don't want it and they don't want you a part of their life at all.
Yes.
It's not easy.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if we keep choosing the things that kind of turn our stomach and we still have to love, well then the reason God's is always eternally part of him. The only way that could ever become part of a characteristic of us, we keep making those difficult choices to choose to love somebody. I'm not saying I'm that. I'm just saying that's something. That's why I said I don't know if we ever get to that bar where it's completely on every time we make it. We're making that choice every time.
Yeah.
I think it's the goal we shoot for.
Yes. So, Ms. Carroll, if I could have a chance at that one, I would say I don't think any of us are achieving it perfectly. I don't think that any of us, or certainly all of my actions would qualify. But do we see it? I definitely think we see it. I think I've experienced it. I've seen it. I've experienced it. There's things I could point to that would fit the definition. So I think it exists. Like a lot of other things, we're not going to do it perfectly, but it is, to Ron's point, trying to make that choice. Trying to make that choice at every opportunity. Yeah, what would Jesus do? That's probably a good thought. So one point about agape is agape an emotion? Yeah, we immediately think of love as an emotion, and that's the way that we most often describe it in our everyday language. That love is an emotion. It's something you feel. You almost have to separate that when you talk about this agape love. It is not something you feel; it's something you do. And so it is an attitude of the heart. It's a conscious, to Ron's point, it's a conscious choice of decisions. Now, can it lead to a feeling love? I don't mean it touchy-feely. Can it lead to, or can it be accompanied by a feeling love? For sure. We got brotherly love for one another also, but at its true root, this how somebody feels about me or how an emotion I feel doesn't affect the choice, the attitude of the heart that I have toward them. So I hope that makes sense or comes across in the right way. This unselfish, self-giving, willful concern for somebody else. It's not natural, to Ron's point. It's not going to be an emotional response. It's going to be a rational, a logical, calculated choice.
You have to step out of your comfort zone.
Agape, yeah, good point. Agape is always risky, right? It involves an element of risk in that because it is irrespective of what the reaction is going to be. Was it risky for God? He loves all of us and gets very little return on that. That every what percentage of people love him back for the way that he loves them? So it involves a risk that it's that's not going to be appreciated or it's not going to be understood. It may at times be flat out rejected and maybe hated because of it. That's agape, right? That it's indifferent to those things. Go keep stubbornly doing the right thing again for somebody else. Then do the next right thing. I heard a wise man say that once. So with those thoughts in mind, let's go to this first bullet question, if you don't mind, on page 26. So this whole section, this like beautiful poetry about what agape is, about what love is inserted here right between chapter 12 and chapter 14. And I think there is perhaps a tendency to pull out chapter 13 like it was this burst of inspiration. It is unrelated to anything around it. It's this special, unique, encapsulated view of what love is. We're going to talk about this at weddings, but it doesn't really have to have anything to do with what was happening in Corinth. And I think that's a mistake. Like it sits where it sits for a reason. So why was this chapter, this beautiful chapter on love, why insert it right here between chapters 12 and 14 in Paul's letter to Corinth?
They didn't have it. They were using gifts before, gifts after. These gifts they were using were kind of punishment person saying, mine's better, like you said that last time, mine's better than yours. That is not obviously the intent of the gifts. We're talking about Holy Spirit and blessed with. Use company with love. Without love, everything else is worthless. So the gift to punish, you might as well not even have the gift.
Yes.
Lord, and then he gave that about the body of the church. They weren't loving each other either. Their worship was somewhat hypocritical.
Yes.
It was like a competition, as you said, or it was chaos. And Paul's trying to get them back to let's peacefully worship our God and love one another.
And I think to Carol's point, if you try to identify, well, were they not loving God or were they not loving each other? I think that's a distinction without a difference, right? If we're not loving one another, that's a reflection of how we feel about God. And so was it their love for God or was it the love for one another? I think the answer is yes. It was just in general, the answer to that is yes. Other thoughts about why this chapter goes here? Yes.
And Paul says it was meaningless. So I think they missed the motive.
Yes. Yeah. That's well said. The motive of the gift, the goal of the gift, all completely agree, all completely lost. And so does all that have any relevance to us today whatsoever? I mean, we already said these miraculous gifts we're not displaying, so what relevance does chapter 13 have to us in that regard?
Well, as Jesus called the Pharisees out, when you're worship God with your heart. They were not doing that.
Yes.
And we can do that. We can come and mark the little boxes. I'm here. I studied my lesson.
Yes.
But if you're not worshiping God in your heart, you're a hypocrite. Whitewashing.
Yes. What Christ would say, right?
Yep.
Other thoughts?
It's kind of the Christian mindset that we should have. The world seeing is completely opposite. Basically, what he's teaching against here. We have Christians who boast about the others were the they also the way that they teach arrogance. We teach I have the knowledge, you have nothing. Just believe, I want to learn you. That is a very offensive thing to the world. We chase more people away from that. It even mentions about, when somebody does wrongdoing, how quick are we to be like, aha, I caught you. As opposed to
Rejoice in that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it should break our heart to be like, wow, what happened? What can we do? We should be looking at it as sorrow.
Yes.
That this wrongdoing happened, not rejoicing.
Yeah.
So I think that's where we are today, is that we may not have spiritual gifts, but we have spiritual.
Yeah. Dad, do you have something else there?
Just I think why he inserted 13 there is self-gratification versus self-sacrifice. Self's in both those terms, but these gratify themselves with their ability to speak in tongues and all the
Yes.
versus what Christ said about self-giving to others, self on a pedestal.
Yes.
Be the lowest, not the highest.
Yes. Could Paul just as easily said, hey guys, you could have the acts of service down cold. You can have the organization of the church dead on. You can have the how to find authority in Scripture dead on. You can have the role of elders and deacons and evangelists. You could have all that straight down the line. The plan of salvation down pat. You have all that stuff down cold. If you don't have love when you come together, you've accomplished zero. That's pretty heavy when you think about it. And we put emphasis on a lot of those things, and for good reason. They're very important. Anytime that we say, well, that's probably as important as love, danger, Will Robinson. Like we've we've missed it. Paul could easily write this chapter about love about any of those things, if love is far beyond all of those. Okay, I do want to we'll introduce chapter 14. Again, following up this chapter on love, we dive into what appears to be a specific issue. What specific gift did the Corinthians appear to have elevated or to be enamored with? So it appears that the Corinthians were enamored with tongue speaking. Now, how do we know that? Well, again, just by way of introduction, we know that in chapter 12 and verse 28, as Paul kind of ranks, and I think he says this, like in order, here's of importance. Where does tongues fall in that order of importance? Last. You'll note that in verse 28. And yet in chapter 14, he touches on it over and over and over again with these issues they had with it. Apparently, the Corinthians were enamored with this gift of tongues. So very quickly before we have to leave, why would it be that tongues, the gift of tongues, whether real or counterfeit, why would it be that the gift of tongues became such an issue? That specific one. Any thoughts on that? I think there's a couple of specific characteristics of the gifts of tongues that make it vulnerable to be abused. And so, because it's, by its very nature, it can't be understood, what does that mean about it? It's not edifying. I would also add to that, it's easy to fake. If it's not understandable, it's incredibly easy to fake. Like, all I have to do is gibberish, right? And so it's incredibly easy to counterfeit. I think the true gift of tongues, at least in my judgment, there's some disagreement about this, probably good discussion. At least my judgment is the kind of the Acts chapter 2, the Pentecost, the gift of someone who knows a different tongue, hearing me speaking in that language even though I don't know it. That appears to be the kind of the genuine gift. But again, I don't know all the languages in the world. You could be talking gibberish to me, and it's an easy one to fake. So that's one. Secondly, is it what's the right way to say this? On the scale of kind of mundane to pretty exciting, where would tongues rank? It's over here, right? It's pretty exciting. Like it's like an ecstatic kind of, like all of a sudden I'm jabbering in a language that I don't know, even if I've got the genuine gift. Like it's pretty exciting. I'm confident that it would have been more spectacular, more blood pumping, more exciting, more enthusiastic than perhaps the gift of teaching, right? Or the gift of revelation of somebody stood up and had a word of revelation. So because I would just submit that because of those two things, because it's easy to fake and because it's wildly exciting, it becomes a prime target to be abused. I think it appears that that's what's happening in Corinth. I think there's plenty of reason to think that everything that was happening in Corinth was not genuine. Like because of this desire to have a better gift, because of this desire to be seen as more spiritual than someone else, it was very easy to counterfeit this gift. And by the way, from what you can study, the pagan religions of this area in this day, this ecstatic utterances would have been part of their religious experience. So it would have been culturally approved also. So compare that easy to fake, wildly exciting gift of tongues to this comparatively pretty mundane, unexciting gift of prophecy. And Paul spends the whole chapter of 14 trying to turn that on its head. So we'll talk more about that on Wednesday. Thank you, everybody, for your thoughts and attention. We'll try to move through lesson 14 and maybe even begin some of lesson 15 next time.